Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is NJOKU, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about 8 potential league winners as we approach our upcoming 2025 fantasy football draft. Players that you should be keeping an eye on, whether it be at the wide receiver, running back, quarterback, or tight end positions. Now, over the course of today's episode, we'll be talking about players such as Matthew Golden, the thumbnail of today's episode, but we want to identify what really creates the potential for league winning upside. Now, in the case of Matthew Golden, the first round selection of the Green Bay Packers in 2025, when we look at the investment that we are making in order to acquire him this season within our upcoming drafts, based on his current ADP on ESPN, Sleeper, and Yahoo, 93, 91.7, 112.4, he's going at a range of wide receiver 37 to 45. So besides the overall investment being, again, far less than other wide receivers that have very similar potential, what Matthew Golden possesses that a lot of the other wide receivers that are being drafted around him is the ability to get even more opportunity share than we currently anticipate and blow beyond those numbers, very similar to a Brian Thomas Jr. in 2024. Now, when we look at the potential investment and the opportunities for targets and usage within this offense, I think it's a perfect recipe for success in regards to a league winner for our 2025 season. So let's talk about this wide receiver who's currently coming off of the boards in the 7th and 8th rounds of our half and full PPR drafts. Now, again, when you are a first round selected wide receiver, it helps a lot in terms of the potential for success as we have seen year over year. In terms of the history of success of first round selected wide receivers over the course of 2020 to 2024, there have been 28 total wide receivers selected within the first round. 19 of those wide receivers had healthy rookie seasons playing 15 or more games. Of those 19 wide receivers, 14 of them were top 36 ranked in year one, which is a 74% success rate. 3 out of every 4 of those wide receivers, again, which is fantastic. Now, how do we find potential upside in the production of Matthew Golden this upcoming season? Well, like I mentioned all the time, opportunity leads to success in fantasy football. So more targets is going to lead to more fantasy points. Now, in the case of potential receivers who were selected in the first round over the course of the last 5 seasons, that were the number 1 target getter within their offense in year one, 12 of those 19 wide receivers were able to participate in being the number 1 target getter. On a per game average, those wide receivers were averaging 7.56 targets per game, which led to 11.26 fantasy points per game and a half PPR. On a 17 game pace, we're talking about 128 targets, 81 receptions, 1,074 receiving yards, 7 receiving touchdowns, and over 191 fantasy points and a half PPR. 10 of those 12 wide receivers that we mentioned earlier were top 30 ranked in year one. So the history suggests that the production for Matthew Golden is going to happen more likely than not. And the other wide receivers that are very similar over the course of the last 5 seasons that I believe that Matthew Golden is going to be able to live up to, if not surpass this upcoming season, based on the opportunity shares he'll be given, is the likes of Devontae Smith and Zay Flowers, both number 1 wide receivers on run-first offenses when they came into the league. In both of these situations, these are first-round selected wide receivers, and they both were able to get themselves over 100 targets in year one. Devontae Smith, 104 targets, 64 receptions, 916 yards, 5 touchdowns for 153.6 fantasy points. Zay Flowers, 108 targets, 77 grabs, 858 through the air, 5 touchdowns, a little bit of a sprinkle in the rushing category, but altogether, 167.9 fantasy points. I think the potential at a base minimum for Matthew Golden this upcoming season, based on what we have seen from the history of first-round selected wide receivers within a very similar type of offense, which is going to be run first with Josh Jacobs. Considering Devontae Smith and Zay Flowers ranked as the number 29 and 30 wide receivers within their rookie season, I think there's a lot of potential for Matthew Golden to follow in those footsteps. But I also believe he has the opportunity to present even more upside even beyond those statistics. I think 100 potential targets is a guarantee, but he has an opportunity to go even further beyond that based on the fact that this offense truly doesn't have enough target competition. I mean, we have to remember that Matthew Golden in the last 23 years is the first wide receiver in the first round selected by the Green Bay Packers organization. They have often leaned away from selecting even offensive pieces that early, outside of quarterbacks in the form of Jordan Love as of late. But in terms of the competition for targets, I think Matthew Golden's immediately going to be the number 1 target getter of this offense, clear and away, because when we have Jaden Reed currently dealing with an injury, which again, there's a possibility he could be limited or even miss week 1 due to the foot injury that has been plaguing him for the entirety of training camp. Even last season, when healthy, with Jordan Love healthy, Jaden Reed was only seeing 4.69 targets per game. Tucker Kraft last season with a healthy Jordan Love, 4.43 targets per game. Christian Watson, whenever he's healthy, which again, we already know he's going to start on the PUP, the physically unable to perform list, as he is recovering from the ACL injury he sustained last season, he was only getting himself 4.67 targets per game. Now, despite all the lack of opportunity between those three receiving options, they all performed incredibly well. Jaden Reed was a top 30 wide receiver, Tucker Kraft was a top 10 tight end, and Christian Watson has sprinkles of upside associated with his production, because even though there's a lack of opportunity, these wide receivers ball out with the offense they're associated with, because Jordan Love is still the real deal. I understand many are disappointed with his production in 2024, but we have to remember he did sustain an MCL injury in week 1. He missed weeks 2 and 3. There was even a conversation that he should have missed even more time, but he rushed himself back. And over the course of the last 2 seasons, as the primary starting quarterback of the organization, he's averaging about 30 to 34 passing attempts per game. And in the last 2 seasons, yes, in 2023, threw for 32 passing touchdowns in 17 games. In 2024, in the 13 full games he played, he threw for 25 touchdowns. He improved from year 1 to year 2 as a starter, from going from 1.88 passing touchdowns per game to 1.92. And if that number continues to creep towards 2.0, the conversation of Tucker Kraft and Matthew Golden taking further steps forward within this offense is going to be incredible. But again, we all knew that Jordan Love was a little bit of a lesser version of himself last season because of the knee injury. I mean, he had 25 less rushing attempts last season, half as many as he did the year before. 50 rushing attempts to 25, because again, he could not move in the pocket. Now, like I mentioned earlier, we already know that Matthew Golden is going to be the number 1 receiving option. We are hoping that his potential resides around the 6 to 7 target range, because as we begin week 1, we are not going to have Christian Watson. We may not have a full healthy Jaden Reed. And because of this, it's going to provide opportunities to look in the direction of your new weapon and number 1 receiving option, the wide receiver that recorded the fastest 40 time in the 2025 NFL Combine with a 4.29. Anything sub 4.3 is ridiculous. And especially considering how much red zone utilization he saw at the University of Texas, I mean, he's going to fit in perfectly and, of course, have league-winning upside. Now, before we continue on talking about more players potentially at the wide receiver, tight end, running back, and quarterback positions, for those of you who want my rankings at all of those positions, whether it be by tier in terms of the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, and defense, and flex positions, half PPR, full PPR, be sure to go ahead, travel down below to the description, and check out Betr. I'll be partnering with them for the entirety of this upcoming season, not only to provide you guys with plays, but of course rankings, not only over the course of the month of August for your upcoming drafts in order to grant you a potential advantage upon your league mates, but every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season, these rankings will be sent from my email directly to yours to go ahead and help you set your lineups. All you have to do today is click on the link down below, sign up using code Andrew, make that first time deposit minimum of $10, and make that first time play within the Betr Picks section, picking more or less on a given player's stats. If you make that $1 minimum play, that's the final step, and then you'll be on my email list. I'll send you those updated rankings every single week for the remainder of the season. Be sure to check your spam folder for those of you who have already done so already, and be sure to go ahead and check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility based on your current location. If you're eligible, take advantage of the opportunity. Play up to $10 to get up to 30 instantly via Betr. If you're not eligible, there's always the opportunity to check out the Patreon. That is also down in the description for those of you who are interested. Thank you very much for all the support. All right, let's continue on with the next wide receiver I wanted to mention. This is Rome Odunze of the Chicago Bears. Now, we're going from a 2025 first-round selected wide receiver to a 2024 first-round selected wide receiver, but what Rome Odunze has in terms of the advantage for potential is that this was a top 10 selected wide receiver in the 2024 NFL Draft. Rome Odunze came off the board in the same vein as Marvin Harrison Jr., and Malik Neighbors. And even though both of those receivers found incredible volumes of success in year 1, and Rome Odunze was slow to start and of course wasn't able to find himself that much success, it was primarily due to the fact that he just wasn't given enough ample opportunity. And we all know that Rome Odunze has the talent to be a dominant force in fantasy football, and that's why I do believe he has league-winning potential upside based on what he could present this season. When we look back at the 2024 season of Rome Odunze, he had to compete for targets with DJ Moore and of course Keenan Allen. Both of those receivers getting over 120 targets in their own right. So, of course, when you limit Rome Odunze to 101 targets, a lot of those inaccurate because of the inability for Caleb Williams to get the ball in his direction, especially deep down the field, there should be a lot of potential progress in 2025. So what makes Rome Odunze very similar to Matthew Golden, a league-winning potential player? Well, again, like I mentioned before, we're making a low investment in terms of draft capital, currently sitting at wide receiver 34, 35, 34. on the the main three platforms of ESPN, Sleeper, and Yahoo, which is ADP 84, 84.3, or 79.8. So when we're able to make a selection very similar to a Matthew Golden, in which you're getting a wide receiver that has the potential to not only be a top 30 option at the position, but also have the ability to potentially even break into the top 24, the top 18, the top 15, because of the offense he's associated with. Now, another reason besides the low overall investment in Rome Odunze would be the potential for a breakout, considering he is a top 10 selected wide receiver in the 2024 NFL draft. When we look at the history of wide receivers that were selected within the top 5 selections of their NFL draft, year 1 to year 2 in the last 5 seasons, 2020 to 2024, we're talking about 5 other wide receivers selected within the top 10. 4 of those 5 wide receivers able to improve their fantasy point per game production in the form of Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, Drake London, and Devontae Smith from year 1 to year 2. I mean, we're talking about Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith that in year 2 were top 12 at the position. Jamar Chase that if in fact he did not sustain an injury in year 2 would have been top 12. And Drake London, of course, he didn't have the greatest quarterbacks throwing in his direction. We had Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ridder running around there for the Atlanta Falcons. But as we approach this upcoming season, we're attaching Rome Odunze to not only an offense that has Caleb Williams, but Ben Johnson. So the potential of him going from 101 targets last year to maybe 135, 140 targets isn't out of the realm of possibility. I think it's closer to the number of 140 than it is 100 this upcoming season. And when you take into account that Ben Johnson is coming over from the Detroit Lions, one of the highest scoring offenses in the National Football League over the course of the last 3 seasons in which he has been associated as their OC, it presents more potential for opportunity in the direction of Odunze, especially when we have the vacated target count of no longer having Keenan Allen and his 120 targets that went in his direction last season. And yes, you're bringing in Colston Loveland, you're bringing in Luther Burden, and these are rookies that are going to have to take some time to build within this offense, but we're going to see a lot of 12 personnel out of this offense. You don't go and make a first-round investment in Colston Loveland, and you don't also keep the contract of Cole Kmet and not send him away via trade unless you know that you're going to utilize 12 personnel in order to run the ball. And when this team gets into their 12 personnel sets, Rome Odunze is not coming off of the field. Him and DJ Moore are going to be the primary 2 receivers out there, which is going to continue to present more and more opportunities within the play action game for Rome Odunze, which I think is certainly going to help Caleb Williams in order to mitigate the overall pass rush. Again, he was the most sacked quarterback amongst all in 2024. And in order to go ahead and mitigate those situations, 12 personnel, a new rebuilt interior of their offensive line with a new guard center guard combo, and the opportunity of opening up play action. In this offseason, Ben Johnson has spoken highly and praised Rome Odunze for being a prototypical X receiver, someone that is going to be able to dominate over the course of this upcoming year. Many of the beat writers that have watched the practices for the Chicago Bears and haven't been allowed to release the film footage that they have recorded because, again, that is against their policies there. But a lot of these beat writers are saying that he is clearing away becoming the number 1 wide receiver of this offense. And from what we saw in the Week 3 preseason game against the Kansas City Chiefs, sure, the Chicago Bears weren't able to keep up with that team. But as a whole, in terms of the opportunity share that went towards Rome Odunze, 17 routes ran, 5 targets, 3 catches, 45 and a touchdown. Of course, that's a 29% target rate based on the targets per route run. And that's a 30% target share in the total volume of passing attempts that Caleb Williams had throughout that span of time. So with more usage coming out of the slot position in terms of the snaps that he is playing there, and the ability to play either the X or the Z within this offense, and also potentially see some opportunities as a slot receiving option, again, a lot more usage than we anticipated in terms of where he was lining up in the preseason, I think the Bears' environment, their entire offense has greatly improved. And Ben Johnson was brought in to fix Caleb Williams, and that's exactly what he's going to do. And he is going to connect Caleb Williams with the wide receiver that was selected just a couple selections after him in the 2024 NFL draft in the form of Rome Odunze. Continuing on, let's talk about one of my favorite tight ends to draft this season. Many of you know I am very much so always been on the side of David NJOKU and trying to take advantage of the value he presents because he's been one of the best fantasy tight ends for the last couple seasons. I mean, as it currently stands, he's coming off of the board on ESPN, Yahoo, and Sleeper as the tight end number 7 through 9. So again, he's coming off the board at 78.3, 92.8, 81.4. So again, the overall investment that you are making in order to get the services of David NJOKU aren't that much, right? You're not having to utilize incredibly high draft capital. You don't have to use the draft capital that's going to be required for Sam Laporta or TJ Hawkinson accordingly, or even Travis Kelce in this circumstance. You can wait far later and get a player like David NJOKU because many people are scared of his potential, which again surprises me because his potential has league-winning upside written all over it. We're talking about in 2024 from week 6 through 16 when healthy. 9.89 targets per game, and 12.02 fantasy points per game and a half PPR. And if we take that upon a 17-game pace, we're talking about 168 targets, 111 receptions, 844 receiving yards, and 9 receiving touchdowns. Again, he would be an easy top 3 tight end by the end of the season if he could stay healthy for the entirety of that sequence. But again, health comes into question. And that's mainly why he has dropped so far down the draft board this season. Because in terms of opportunity share, it's going in his direction. The Browns have been top 6 in terms of tight end targets in each of the last 5 consecutive seasons with Kevin Stefanski as the head coach and primary play caller. So opportunity is there. And the question now becomes, is he going to stay healthy? And who's playing quarterback for the Cleveland Browns? Well, let's talk about his health. David NJOKU is going into his age 29 season. This is the 9th year of his NFL career. And even though that is the case, I understand that he missed 6 games last season, but the last 2 games of the season were more of like he's quote unquote hurt. It's more of we're going to shut him down because we're not competing for anything. Otherwise, the 3 prior seasons had played 16, 14, and 16 games. So yes, he may miss a sprinkle of 2 to 3 games a season, but ultimately that's the same average of a running back or a wide receiver across the league. So when we're talking about the potential of him playing 15 to 16 games this year in the final year of his contract, potentially trying to earn some money this offseason, whether he stays with the Cleveland Browns or goes beyond. I think that the injury, quote unquote, last season, especially late in the season, isn't something that I'm looking at and thinking, yeah, he's injury prone, because that hasn't been the case for him over the course of his career. And when we take into account that his starting quarterback is going to be Joe Flacco for at least the first 6 weeks, if not even beyond that, depending on how this team starts. I understand they have Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders, but they don't want to throw these quarterbacks into the mix come weeks 1 through 6. They take on the Bengals, the Ravens, the Packers, the Lions, the Vikings, and the Steelers. All negative game scripts, and I wouldn't throw a rookie into those conversations because they are going to get battered and potentially shattered within those matchups. And in those games, again, negative game scripts. And with Joe Flacco, that means a lot of fantasy points, because the last time that David NJOKU played with Joe Flacco in 2023, from weeks 14 through the NFL playoffs, they were averaging 10 targets per game together and 17.22 fantasy points per game and a half PPR. Even with DTR last season, we saw that David NJOKU can sustain 10 targets, 8 receptions, 66 yards, and over 10 fantasy points. I don't care who's playing quarterback. I think that Joe Flacco certainly helps the upside of David NJOKU, but even if he gets replaced midway through the season for a Dylan Gabriel or a Shedeur Sanders, this offense has revolved around throwing the ball towards their tight end. And David NJOKU is a dominant force within that conversation. I think as of right now, he's an investment that I'm making to take advantage of his early schedule for the first 8 games of the season. And then afterward, you could very easily have a second tight end drafted on roster like a Jonnu Smith, a Jake Ferguson, potentially even a Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, Mason Taylor, Brenton Strange, somebody for a far lesser investment, to where once you get midway through the season and that other tight end you have starts to build momentum, you can go ahead and ship away David NJOKU for some extra potential trade value and then, play your other tight end accordingly. But as of right now, I think there's a lot of league winning potential upside, especially where he's going to be able to provide so much fantasy points within the first half of the regular season of fantasy football. Weeks 1 through 14 determines whether you get to the playoffs. So if you're able to string together 7 dominant performances from David NJOKU, that gives you so much of an advantage, it's worth the investment for this upcoming season. The next player I wanted to mention is TYREEK Hill. Now, I mentioned earlier, Matthew Golden, Rome Odunze, and David NJOKU, their current value, where we are able to draft them, they do provide league-winning potential. So why do I mention someone like TYREEK Hill, who currently has an ADP of 31.2, 28.4, and 36.4 on the 3 main platforms, wide receiver 12 to 15. Why would I mention a player that is going to require such a high investment? Well, when we talk about the investment that we're making in TYREEK Hill and the potential that he could provide, he has the ability to be a top 3 wide receiver. And it wouldn't surprise any of us if he returned to form very similar to the 4 consecutive seasons prior to 2024. I'm talking about 2020 to 2023, where he was a top 6 fantasy wide receiver year in and year out. And I honestly think that we should be taking advantage of the ADP discount based on the fear of the Dolphins offense. There's been a lot of chatter this offseason in regards to the Dolphins really not going to be looking like a good team. And I'm okay with that. They don't need to look like a good team. They don't need to win games for their fantasy value to be there. And I could understand the hesitation in investing in a Miami Dolphin because of Tua Tagovailoa and his injury history. I can understand not wanting to invest in TYREEK Hill because he's 31 years old this season. I can understand that, but we got to remember, even though Tyreek Hill wasn't very productive last year, when you're missing Tua for that long and you're dealing with a wrist injury yourself in which he required surgery this offseason, these are things that certainly impacted his potential for upside last year. I mean, the 2 prior seasons with the Dolphins was averaging 19 or 20 fantasy points per game in those years. I mean, he had a 32 and 36% target rate within this offense in terms of targets per route run. This most recent season, only 23% with a healthy Tua Tagovailoa. And I understand a lot of that does revolve around the idea that Devon Achane and, of course, Jonnu Smith got themselves far more targets within the offense, but that's primarily because of the fear that Tua Tagovailoa had with the ball in his hands, trying to get it out of his hands quickly, not able to try to sustain any hits, not trying to get a concussion. So once he drops that fear and we get back to the Tyreek Hill of the 2022 and 2023 season, I think there's a potential for an elite campaign here in 2025 where could be one of his final incredible seasons as a wide receiver in the National Football League. I'm thinking we're far closer to his 2023 production than we are to this most recent season in which he had 900 receiving yards. I think there's that much talent left in the tank of Tyreek Hill. And when we talk about this offense and the potential of them having to be in negative game scripts because their defense can't hold anybody, if that's going to lead to more passing, and more, deep down the field extended passes where you don't have Jonnu Smith anymore and you have a hobbled Achane to begin the season and you're pushing the ball down the field even further, Tua Tagovailoa really allowed Tyreek Hill to be of value with the deep ball in 2022 and 2023. In those seasons was targeted 20 or more yards down the field 35 and 38 times in comparison to last season where Tyreek Hill only had 19 of those certain targets. And that was with or without Tua. That's all combined throughout this entire season. So once we go ahead and get a healthy Tua back and he's pushing the ball down the field and we're able to find ourselves in negative game scripts, I think that the discount that we are being allowed to have in Tyreek Hill, being a 3rd or 4th round selection, I think is enough to where we are taking him and we are going to test the potential of his league winning upside here in 2025. Now, before we continue on, again, I want to remind you guys, if you want to get my all-encompassing rankings and, of course, my 2025 fantasy football draft guide, besides checking out Betr, you can go ahead and find them via Patreon. There's a link down in the description for those of you who want to join the community. Of course, besides providing the rankings and, of course, the draft guide, we have Discord community server access, which is privated. And I think the most valuable tool within the entire Patreon conversation is being able to message me directly and ask me any and all questions you have over the course of your subscription. So you can go ahead, click on the little message envelope in the top right corner, send me a message, whether it is, hey Andrew, which strategy should I be employing within my upcoming draft? I have the number 6 overall pick. Or hey, I'm playing in a keeper league, where should I be looking in terms of who am I keeping? Or I'm playing in a dynasty league, Andrew, what should I be looking for in terms to try to rehaul this entire team? Or should I be looking to maybe not rebuild and push for a championship? Any and all questions are invited. Any and all scoring formats I'm more than willing to talk about. So if you guys are interested, be sure to check that out today. Link down in the description. Thank you very much. Let's continue on with a Seattle Seahawk by the name of Kenneth Walker. Now, last season, the Seattle Seahawks had a league winner in the form of JSN. Based on his draft capital utilized and the upside that he presented, it was fantastic. Now, at the running back position, a couple incredible league winners were running backs like Chase Brown, who was able to get into the conversation because of the injury to Zach Moss and take over. Now, I still think that there's potential for Kenneth Walker to be a league winner, even though his draft capital is significantly higher. Currently on ESPN, Sleeper, Yahoo, sits at RB 17, 17, and 15, coming off of the board at 47.9, 42.7, and 41.0. So if you're able to utilize the potential of 4th round draft capital on the likes of someone like Kenneth Walker, and I've even seen him drop into the 5th round based on the uncertainty and the hesitation to draft a player that has an injury kind of history, I understand it, but I've seen him drop very far. So the question is, if you're drafting this running back at RB 17, if he finishes as RB 9 overall, does that make him a league winner? To which I would say yes. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to be able to draft a team in which you start with a wide receiver in the 1st, RB in the 2nd, quarterback in the 3rd, and Kenneth Walker in the 4th. And the reason why I say that is because if you draft stability within your first 3 picks, wide receiver, RB, and then a quarterback, because you know Lamar or Josh Allen are going to be able to deliver incredible performances, and you're not going to find a landmine in round 3. You can find production in Kenneth Walker elevating himself and being that league-winning piece in round 4. So as we approach this upcoming season, let's talk about Kenneth Walker's career as of late. I think this is the make or break season. This is the final year of his rookie deal, and a lot is on the line because there's a lot of money on the line, because if in fact the injuries that have plagued him year over year potentially do so once again this season, then Zach Charbonnet's taken this job and running to the hills. Now, this most recent year, Kenneth Walker missed a total of 6 games. And this offseason, he's been dealing with a foot injury, but as of late, he's been practicing in full for the Seattle Seahawks. So I'm not worried about him for week 1. I'm worried about what his potential looks like for the remainder of the season. And can he sustain the hits that he takes year in and year out, stay healthy, and play 15 to 17 games? Because if he can, I think top 10 upside within this specific offense is absolutely attainable, and I'll tell you why. This team has gone ahead and rehauled a lot of their overall approach offensively, whether it is via the coaching staff, new offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak, who is a significant upgrade from the last 2 offensive coordinators, whether that be Ryan Grubb or Shane Waldron. Then you also went ahead and you improved the blocking scheme. You bring in a first-round draft capital selection in your left guard. Your offensive tackles are already great in terms of their overall run blocking, having Cross and Lucas. Then you also bring in Cooper Kupp, who has never been afraid to put his face mask into the chest of a defender, or of course, his shoulder pad into a defensive tackle's chest. I mean, listen, this is a run blocking attack that is going to be far more improved in comparison to where they were last year. And when you implement the Clint Kubiak outside zone scheme, it's going to really elevate, because Clint Kubiak, as an offensive coordinator in the National Football League in 2021 and in 2024, has elevated his backfields. I mean, the Saints in 2024 had the 8th most opportunities to running backs. Kamara was number 6 amongst all running backs in terms of fantasy points per game on average. 2021 Vikings had the 10th most opportunities to their running backs. Dalvin Cook was the number 11 running back in terms of fantasy points per game on average. And I truly do believe that Kenneth Walker has the ability to be able to follow that. Now, like I mentioned earlier, Clint Kubiak has an outside zone scheme very similar to a Kyle Shanahan. Again, he was actually the passing game coordinator for the 49ers in 2023 prior to getting the most recent job with the Saints, and now this job with the Seattle Seahawks. But the outside zone is something that Kenneth Walker in his career has absolutely enjoyed. Running to the C-gap last season, whether it was on the left side, 4.1 yards per carry, or to the right side, a 5.8 yard per carry average. When we take into account the 67 rushing attempts he had in terms of outside zone last season, he was able to accumulate 348 rushing yards, which is a 5.2 yard per carry average, in comparison to the inside zone, which yielded only a 3.7 yard per carry average. But you've gone ahead and you've improved the offensive line in terms of the interior. So it does potentially increase even that number, but this is going to primarily be an outside zone scheme. Now, besides statistics like that gives me confidence in the potential of Kenneth Walker. Last season amongst all running backs, he was able to put up a number of 0.42 avoided tackles per carry, which according to Pro Football Focus is the highest they've ever had in the history of the site. The 3rd highest potential running back rushing grade amongst all in 2024, had 9 carries of 20 or more yards, which was number 5 amongst all running backs with a minimum of 150 attempts. He had 53 targets, 46 receptions. He's an incredible receiver and had the 12th most receptions amongst all running backs last year, despite the fact that he missed 6 games due to injury. Now again, when you give this man opportunity, he is going to deliver. And if he can stay healthy, we're talking about last season, averaging 14.4 fantasy points per game in the 11 healthy games he played. And in games in which he was given 12 or more rushing attempts, was averaging 16.4 fantasy points per game in those 8 games. And I understand you may be worried about his potential. And if you are, that's fine. You can skip away from a guy like Kenneth Walker and you can invest in Zach Charbonnet, who I believe has to be selected if in fact you are picking Kenneth Walker in any sort of circumstance. Because last season, in the games in which Kenneth Walker missed, Charbonnet was averaging 17.62 fantasy points per game, was a far more efficient runner. And to be even more specific, I just want to mention this because Charbonnet could be the league winner. I could be totally wrong and Kenneth Walker is not the guy and it's Charbonnet. Because last season, besides the fact that in the absence of Kenneth Walker, he was averaging 4.8 yards per carry, and 0.78 fantasy points per rushing attempt, which ranked number 6 amongst all running backs with 100 carries last season. The preseason thus far has revolved around a lot of Zach Charbonnet because of the time that has been missed by Kenneth Walker. So if you are someone that potentially wants to lean away from Kenneth Walker, invest in Zach Charbonnet, go for it. But if you're going to grab Kenneth Walker, please do yourself the favor, get Charbonnet. I understand that it increases the potential of the volume of kind of investment you have to make in terms of draft capital, but it will pay dividends by the end of the season. The next player I wanted to mention is a quarterback by the name of JJ McCarthy, because earlier this morning, we got news that Adam Thielen was traded to the Minnesota Vikings. And I believe a move like that is just another confirmation as to the potential of which JJ McCarthy possesses going into this upcoming season. Again, when we're talking about what it means to be a potential league-winning quarterback, you got to make it into the top 12. That is a given. And based on the fact that we know that J.J. McCarthy is a former first-round selection in the 2024 NFL Draft, in fact, the number 10 overall selection, and his current ADP going into year one of his full season career is going to be quarterback 17, 19, and 20. There's a lot of potential for room to be able to grab him incredibly late, maybe your final pick of the draft, and for him to go ahead and develop into the quarterbacks that Kevin O'Connell has been able to present to us year in and year out. I mean, we're talking about in 2023 when Kirk Cousins was healthy, was averaging 18.71 fantasy points per game. Sam Darnold last season, 18.11 fantasy points per game. Over the course of the last 3 seasons, 18 or more fantasy points has been on average the quarterback 9, 10, or 8. So if we're going to be in a situation in which we're averaging 18 fantasy points per game with the weapons that surround J.J. McCarthy in the form of Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, T.J. Hawkinson, now Adam Thielen, you have an incredible offensive line that made improvements this offseason. You have Aaron Jones, and now you also bring in the likes of Jordan Mason. There are so many weapons within this offense, and this was a team that won 14 games last season. Their defense is still one of the top in the National Football League. They get back their starting left tackle in Christian Darrisaw. They also have Brian O'Neill, their starting right tackle, who is actually the 3rd highest ranked offensive tackle in the National Football League in terms of pass blocking win rate. A ridiculous number. In terms of pass block win rate last season, in fact, the Vikings were ranked number 2 amongst all offensive lines. And I think they've improved their offensive line this offseason. But when we're talking about the potential of the 2025 Vikings, when we take into account the Vikings last year were number 17 in terms of total passing attempts and number 10 in terms of total rushing attempts by running backs, again, I think this is going to be a year in which maybe we don't see as much running of the football. We may revert back to the 2022-2023 Vikings days in which they ranked as the number 3 and 4 overall team in terms of quarterback passing attempts, where they were throwing the ball 630 and 668 times in those given years. Because again, when you have a weapon like J.J. McCarthy and all the weapons that you've now surrounded him with, let's air this thing out. Again, when we're talking about an offense and a team that, was so successful last year with Sam Darnold, why not continue that potential for success this year? Like I've mentioned already this offseason, a fun fact, 44 of the last 48 top 12 ranked quarterbacks. So in the last 4 seasons, 44 of those 48 quarterbacks came from teams with winning records. J.J. McCarthy could be in line for that this year. Now, a team that is a little bit less likely to be able to perform that potential for upside and get themselves a winning record, but I think they have a chance within the AFC South, because anything could happen, is Trevor Lawrence. This is the final kind of honorable mention that I wanted to quickly bring up. Trevor Lawrence, back in 2023 and 2022, was a top 12 ranked quarterback in each of those 2 years. And the scheme, the weapons, and the rushing upside is the perfect recipe for a QB1 potential season here for Trevor Lawrence. First and foremost, let's talk about the scheme. You bring in Liam Cohen, the new offensive play caller, former OC of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year, who elevated Baker to being the number 4 overall quarterback in fantasy. Baker threw for over 40 passing touchdowns. He was able to elevate that offense to score a total of 21 more touchdowns than the year prior. We're scoring 9 more points per game as a team from 2023 to 2024. That was the doing of Liam Cohen. And again, the reason why Baker Mayfield was able to improve as much as he did is because 47% of the passes he threw were within 2.5 seconds. His average time to throw last season was 2.62 because he got the ball and he knew exactly where he was going with it every single time. And when you have a struggling young quarterback in the form of Trevor Lawrence, giving him direction with that kind of an offensive scheme helps. And when you bring in weapons in the form of Travis Hunter, the number 2 overall selection of the 2025 NFL Draft, you have the ascension of Brian Thomas Jr. Brenton Strange is going to be the full-time starter. Diami Brown is being brought in as a deep receiving threat. You bring in Hainsey and McCarry to be your new starting center and right guard, which are improvements from last year. You bring in Hunter Long, a former Los Angeles Rams tight end, mainly because of the Sean McVay tree, which of course we all know Liam Cohen is from. He was the former OC of the Rams in 2022. You bring in Hunter Long, which is graded as the 5th best run blocking tight end in the National Football League. You also bring in Johnny Munt, who was also in the top 10 of run blocking at the tight end position a couple years ago. He also has played for the Rams and the Vikings, both coaches that are within the McVay tree. So they know what they're getting in terms of the investment. They're bringing in help for Trevor Lawrence at all forms. You bring in, Bashaw Tutin to continue to stir up this backfield. The way that I see it, yes, I believe that Baker Mayfield's supporting cast is better than what Trevor Lawrence is going to be, kind of experiencing this year. But what Trevor Lawrence has that Baker Mayfield may not have to the extent is the rushing upside. I understand that Baker scrambles for a bunch of yards, but we can see designed runs from Trevor Lawrence. I mean, over the course of the last 3 full seasons of his career, 334 and 2 touchdowns, 291 and 5 touchdowns, 339 and 4 touchdowns. And with the backfield being a complete committee potentially to start the season, Trevor Lawrence could be stealing a lot of touchdowns there, and he's going to have to be in a lot of negative game scripts. So scrambling is going to be added on top of that. We're talking about a defense in the Jaguars last season that gave up the 4th most points per game on average. So all of these ingredients into one makes the potential of Trevor Lawrence, who's being selected relatively late within the conversation of quarterback, to potentially being one of these top 12 options that could be a league winner in this season. The only other player that I considered potentially adding within this video that I did not was Rashee Rice. I know that earlier this morning he was designated with, the suspension taking place between weeks 1 through 6, but I've already got him relatively high, highly ranked here, and we'll discuss more of that in the coming days when we go over my top 50 wide receiver rankings. Nonetheless, that's going to cover for me today. Thank you everybody for watching. Again, I'll be back tomorrow with more videos, back later tonight with another live stream. So if you have any questions for your upcoming drafts, be sure to swing on by, or otherwise you can take your time, send me questions via the Patreon, or if you just want my all-encompassing rankings, want to get in and out and potentially make some plays via Betr, be sure to check out the link down in the description. Use code Andrew. Make that first time deposit minimum of 10. Make that first time play within the Betr Picks section minimum of $1, and then you're good to go for the remainder of the season. All right, guys, that's going to cover for me today. Thank you everybody for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.